basis. So the recommendation is to implement something it's called enterprise information management, to sort of drop into this sort of jargon for a moment, but that's the collective term we use for both the technology, the processes, and the best practices, if you like, around managing information better. It's about moving from typically departmental-centric view of managing data. So the finance department has their own systems, the HR has their own systems, the frontline departments have all their own data, their own applications, their own systems. And there are good reasons why these situations come about. It's not that necessarily the mistakes we made getting there. It's just that's the reality that we have. But we create our own data. That means that there are always inconsistencies between the different data sources. So that there is no ability to bring any of these data sources together and have a consistent view of what's going on. And lots of work has to be done. So you kind of have to bring all that together and create a framework. You have to set standards. You have to have a governance model for data. You have to set standards for how it's going to be stored, who owns it, how that ownership manifests itself. People usually in the business have to I agree that this is what a customer record looks like, this is what a procurement system looks like, set those standards, and then you have to have a body of people that enforces those standards, and everybody has to be brought into it. So it isn't just about technology here, it is also about governance. It's as much about governance as there is about technology. But the technology, of course, is the thing that makes it possible, it's the thing that makes it achievable. You have to have a data quality engine that can run through hundreds, thousands, if not millions of records to be able to reconcile, to duplicate, and to fill in missing values. That is the automation part, if you like, but none of that will work without any kind of governance in place to set it all up. So I won't spend too much time talking about that, but it has been identified as probably, certainly in the IT community, as one of the biggest, I think, issues moving forward. And certainly always you will find data quality and data integration as well in the top 5 list of things that IT want to fix. Often though, they still are not getting the mandate from the business, if you like, to go out and do the fixing, to spend the money, even though there's a huge amount of ROI potentially that could come on the back of that. Not least of which is the actual difficult to measure, almost impossible to quantify trust that business users would get by having the knowledge that information they're using is trustworthy enough to make what can be quite critical decisions on. That trust thing, the intangible benefit, is a very difficult thing to gain, and like all trust is very easy to lose. One bad system, one really clear data quality problem can undo lots and lots of work that's gone on before it, but it is becoming increasingly important. And I think the sort of final message here is that everything I'll talk about from now on, if you like, in terms of pervasive business intelligence, is predicated on the fact that you've got to have good quality information under the sitting underneath it. And it's not just business intelligence, that applies to every single application, IT application that's actually in your organisation. So this is so fundamental, it's almost amazing that we still have to talk about it, but I think it's that mindset, treating it, information, data in the organisation as a strategic asset, is the thing that we have to strive for. And I think we've still got some way to go. So the second topic was the third pillar, if you like, and that was about really getting information transparency, getting information around to everybody in the business, theoretically, who's making decisions. And I'm not just thinking about big strategic decisions, I'm talking about little ones as well. So this is a fairly recent survey. I think information is probably about a year old now, but trust me, nothing's really changed a great deal, that looked at the percentage of people in organisations, again across private and public sector, that have access to business intelligence technology. So how many people, and this is decision makers, so we're not talking about necessarily people who are not just in service roles, people who are making decisions. And you can see that there has been a spectacular increase in the use of business intelligence over the last few years or so, from 25% to 28%. And a colleague of mine was presenting this in a positive light. And to be honest, this slide I find is the most depressing slide in my deck, actually, because I think this is a total failure. I think this is a failure on part of vendors like ourselves, as well as, you know, I'm sorry to say, but yourselves too, because I actually have a presentation on my hard drive going back to the year 2000 that said that the average number of people who could use BI in organisations was 25%, and we expect it to be much better in a few years' time. So the thing is that actually, in fact, very few people have access to business intelligence. That's the situation we're in today, and it's been the situation for the last 20 years, and it's only grown by a tiny little amount. And I, having spent so much time talking about the benefits of BI, I can show you in other presentations fantastic ROIs and case studies and brilliant things that people do. I find that frankly shocking that, you know, we still end up with really a very small number of people that have to make business decisions, but somehow we're not giving them the information, the data that they could have. And I know you're thinking the reason why, because this stuff costs money, and you're thinking, oh, it's costly. But we'll come on to that later. It isn't just cost, actually, that is the major thing. What's worse, actually, is when you drill down, if you exclude the sort of the business intelligence pundit, drill down into the detail. If that 28% is using business intelligence, who are they? And you can find that the vast majority are what we call power users and analysts, so people whose day job it is actually to crunch numbers all day long, followed by a much reduced number of managers, so we will often give it to some senior people in the organisation, we'll give it to executives, but when it comes down to operations staff, then we're looking at about 24%, so that's 24% of the 28% of frontline staff have easy access to information. That's a tiny number. I'm not going to do the maths, so I always embarrass myself when I try and do it on the fly, but that's a very, very, very small number indeed. Customers and suppliers, external agencies, infinitesimal, and you know that's just absolutely shocking. So really, over the last 15 years, the number of people using BI has hardly changed. 50% increase, and the type of people using BI has hardly changed. It's still really in the hands. So I think of it as like an information elite. It's like there's a few people in the organisation that have access to all this data, but those of us doing sort of the day job, you know, doing the real work, still unfortunately have to make do with guesswork, gut feel, and you know that can't be a very good situation. So the answer, very simple, it's just pervasive BI. It's give it to everybody. So that's the end of the presentation. But when I talk about pervasive BI, I think of it in 3 dimensions. I think about it in terms of the depth to which you push it down the organisation. So again, historically and culturally, we like to keep it at the senior management level only, if we do it. I'm sure there's a few of you in your organisation that probably don't have an enterprise-wide strategic business intelligence strategy where you roll information out even to management. But push it all the way down, as far as it can go, to people who are making day-to-day decisions. You know, we're not talking about giving them strategic data, we're talking about giving them the data they need to do their job. It's quite simple, but easily accessed. So from the highest to the lowest level. And there are some great examples in the private sector of organisations that push data beyond the place that you'd expect. British Airways are always a good example because they've had an enterprise data warehouse for like 20 years now. So there are very few companies, organisations in the UK with quite as, if you like, a mature implementation of BI. Their baggage handling teams have access to business intelligence, so they can look at their own performance, measure the performance against other teams, and how that rolls up into their overall baggage handling performance. And the reason they do that is because the big strategic goal of British Airways a few years ago was to move up the rankings of punctuality. And when you do the strategic analysis of airline punctuality, there is one main reason why airplanes are late taking off, and that's actually baggage. It's not, maybe you probably know this better than I do, actually, I have to be careful. But it's baggage, that can often be the biggest case. So they set about finding out, well, what were the problems? You know, this is classic strategic decision making. What was causing the baggage to be late? There were 2 reasons. One was the baggage handlers themselves. They were not getting the job done quite as quickly as perhaps we would have liked. And the second was travel agents. They were doing crazy transfer times between different terminals. So they educated the travel agents and they educated the baggage handlers on the role that their performance had in the strategic goal of the organisation. Remember, we're going back to the alignment of the organisation. And two together, by educating the two, improved their punctuality, and they rose higher up the rankings. So classic example. Now, the baggage handlers are not sitting in front of a screen analysing data, doing a bit of drag and drop and drill down, comparing their performance against that. They've just got very simple access to information, but it's enough for them to understand what they're doing, how well they're doing it, and how it fits into the strategic goal. And that's what we talk about here. It's not too fancy, but it's that information that's important. BI deployed across, that's the second dimension, across the organisation. So typically it has a sort of heartland in finance. It's a very numerical job, and therefore they tend to be very comfortable analysing numbers, so that's fine. But you've got to get it out into other areas. There are some areas which historically, certainly in local government, have done a good job of analysis, and that's usually been on top of an operational system. So social services, maybe I could put almost over here, because there are lots of social services departments that have some reasonable, good reporting systems. But actually, it's not really about having a department with good access to data. It's being able to bring that data together with other departments. That's where you're aiming for. So it's across the entire organisation, then being able to merge together. And then last but absolutely not least, outside the organisation, massive value in sharing information amongst different agencies. It's the question you always ask yourself is, what have I got in my database that could be of value to people that I work with? So you kind of create an information supply chain here where agencies that work together share data securely, of course. But that's a technology issue. That's easy to handle. It's as you'll see, it's the culture actually of trying to think that actually this is normal. Sharing information externally, having information available in all departments and sharing that is normal. Having information at all levels of the organisation is normal. Is actually a massive cultural change. And that's where I think actually, rather than technology, as you'll see in the